So, last we talked about, guys, remember the Yalta conference, okay? Where was Yalta? Where's Yalta? It's in Russia, right? And Stalin controlled it. Roosevelt wouldn't meet with Churchill, okay? Soviet influence, okay? During the war, the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, okay, which is now the CIA, and the Army, they tracked Russian interference in the United States, Russian spies, okay? And you guys are familiar with the McCarthy era a little bit, all right, and the Second Red Scare. Well, after the Soviet Union collapsed, they declassified some of this information, and Russia opened up her archives. So researchers were able to go in and kind of put two and two together. And so today we know that during the war, during World War II, the Soviet Union, which was our ally, remember, had Soviet spies in the United States, in our government. Okay? So we know today that the communist infiltration of the U.S. government during the 1930s and 40s was real and damaging. The opening of some Soviet archives and the release of the Vanona project, okay, this was intercepted wartime and post-wartime messages between Moscow and communist agents in the United States, confirmed much of what Whittaker Chambers and Elizabeth Bentley said. Now, Whittaker Chambers, okay, is this guy on the bottom right. He's a confessed Soviet spy. He turned himself in, and this is his book called Witness. Okay? Chambers claimed that this man, Alger Hiss, was a Soviet spy. Hiss was a State Department official. He worked for the State Department. Okay? Hiss was at Yalta, advising President Roosevelt. So if Hiss was a Soviet spy, a Soviet agent, Roosevelt was on Russian soil being advised by a Russian agent, determining what Europe was going to look like after World War II. Okay? That's a pretty big deal. Now, other ex-communists told the House Un-American Activities Committee that there were Soviet spies, okay, in our government. 3 recent books, The Haunted Wood, The Vanona Decoding Soviet Espionage in America, and The Vanona Secrets, provide evidence that American communists successfully infiltrated the State Department, the Treasury Department, the OSS, the Justice Department, the Agriculture Department, the Commerce Department, the Office of War Information, the War Production Board, the Board of Economic Warfare, the Civil Service Commission, the AAA, the Army, the Navy, Congress, the Manhattan Project, and the United Nations, and the White House. The highest-ranking Soviet agents included this man, Harry Dexter White, who was the number 2 man at the Treasury, Alger Hiss, key State Department official at Yalta, Duncan Lee, chief assistant to Wild Bill Donovan of the OSS. So this is akin to the chief assistant to the director of the CIA being a Soviet agent. Yes. Congressman Samuel Dickstein, there's nothing against the law being a communist. Now, if you are stealing secrets or providing information, okay, or acting against the country, there's crimes there. Okay? But so if Congressman Samuel Dickstein is a communist, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not illegal. You understand? Okay? Lucien Curie, special assistant to President Roosevelt. The authors of the Vanona Secrets go so far to identify Harry Hopkins, and you've heard that name, one of FDR's most trusted advisors is a Soviet agent. If that is true, then the Soviet Union had in place an agent of influence who had the ear of the President of the United States on every significant issue of policy. So when the Soviet Union collapsed and they opened up their archives, we were able to put messages that were intercepted during the Vanona project, code names, and try and figure out the code names that were being used to communicate with agents in the United States. We were able to figure out who these people were. Now, Alger Hiss went on trial. He was not convicted of being a Soviet agent. He was convicted of perjury. Okay? President Truman defended Alger Hiss. He did not feel that he was a Soviet spy. Okay? But Chambers, who confessed he was a Soviet spy, said he was. Now, the Vanona project basically tells us he was a spy. Now, when you're talking about the Manhattan Project, we know today there were 2 Soviet spies working on the project to build the atomic bomb. Joseph Stalin knew that we were building a bomb before the Vice President Harry Truman knew, because he had a spy in place. One of them was a British gentleman named Klaus Fuchs, who was working on the Manhattan Project and sharing those secrets with the Soviet Union. Okay? He went to jail. Okay? Truman didn't find out we had the atomic bomb until after he became president. They didn't even tell the vice president, but Stalin knew about it. Okay, we're going to detonate the bomb in 1945. The Soviet Union will get it by 1949. We will detonate the first hydrogen bomb. And the Soviets will have agents steal secrets on the hydrogen bomb. And they will get it a year and a half after we have it. Okay? That was the Rosenbergs. I don't know if you ever heard of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. He was executed. She was executed for selling these secrets to the Soviet Union. Okay? Now, she wasn't working on the project. He was. Her brother was probably more guilty than she was, but she would not roll over on her brother. And they didn't have the evidence on her brother. So the government linked her with her husband, and they were both executed. If she would have rolled over on her brother, she probably would not have been executed. But they were selling these secrets on the hydrogen bomb to the Soviet Union. Okay? So, guys, this idea that the second Red Scare is all McCarthyism, that there were no communist agents in our government, is false. Eisenhower said at the time, and Eisenhower, you got to look at Eisenhower, he's one of the most level-headed here, moderates, said of McCarthy, he said, thank God somebody's doing it, because somebody needs to point out that the Soviet Union is trying to infiltrate our government. And they did. Now, like I said before, guys, it's not against the law to be a communist, but it is against the law to work for another country. You know what I mean? So there's a fine line here between, you know, U.S. citizens that have communist beliefs and want to be communists, and somebody working for the other side. And so it did go too far with McCarthy and HUAC and so forth, and loyalty pledges and so forth. But we were moving into a nuclear age, and there was fear. Okay? You think the Russians are... I mean, we know the Russians are still doing this crap. They tried to interfere in our elections. They try to interfere in other people's elections. They're still doing it. So, yeah, it's just kind of interesting to know that they were successful at getting people in place in our government. Okay? And probably still are. Have any of you guys watched The Americans, the TV show? Okay. This is pretty good. Okay? It's about a family that, they're spies, Russian spies in the United States. And it just kind of follows what they do, and it's pretty interesting. Okay. Here we are. We're ready to go into Germany. The guys that were landing on Normandy, their goal was to get to Berlin. They wrote songs about it. When the Yanks go marching into Berlin, this thing will be over, right? So, on March 7th, the First Army crosses the Rhine. Remember Rhineland? Okay. Which is, in Western Germany. We cross the Rhine, which is kind of like one of the defensive barriers Germans can use to fight behind the river. So once we cross the Rhine, they're crumbling. On the east, the same thing is happening. The Russians are coming. Okay? So Eisenhower, Roosevelt, they've got a decision to make. What are we going to do? How are we going to wrap up this war? Okay? If we take Berlin, we take Prague, Czechoslovakia. Remember, Czechoslovakia was a democratic nation before the war. If we take these two capitals, we can kind of hold Stalin to his promises about not expanding communism into Eastern Europe. But more Americans are going to die in doing that. Then, the other option is to mop up the German forces in Western Germany and allow the Soviet Union to take Prague and Berlin and let them suffer the casualties. This would make it easier for Stalin to impose communism in Eastern Europe, in places like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, not to mention Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, the Baltic states. Churchill tried to warn Eisenhower of this, and Roosevelt, but they wanted to avoid the casualties. So the United States is going to stop west of Berlin, about 50 miles, at the Elbe River. It is here at the Elbe River where the Soviet troops that will take Berlin and then move westward. This is where American and Soviet troops will meet, at this river about 50 miles west of Berlin. It's a celebration. Russian and American troops will swim across the river. They will embrace, swap cigarettes, hold hands, raise their fists. Celebration. Then the river will freeze. You get it? The Cold War. Okay? Eastern Europe will go from it was cold. From Nazi tyranny to commie tyranny. They'll play on words there. So once those Red Army tanks rolled into Eastern Europe, they didn't leave. All of these countries will fall under Soviet control. And when you're done writing that, I have a map on this slide. And kind of show you how that all went down. Now, in the textbooks, guys, this whole thing with the Vanona project, so if you look at your history textbooks throughout American history, we don't know this information about Soviet spies in America, the details of them. Your textbook does mention the Vanona project, but the old textbook doesn't. That was made in 1993. Okay? So that's kind of new information that we were able to garner post-Cold War. You have to remember, guys, going back to the 1920s, there's a lot of anti-communist fervor in this country. Okay, so because we're allies with the Soviet Union, there's still that coldness between the two ideas, of capitalism and communism. And it's not going to take long for that to kind of rear its ugly head. Okay, refresh my memory. And how many people are doing a battle? Jace, what are you're doing?
It was the
Dien Bien Phu?
Yeah.
Okay. You'll go first. You'll go second. Okay, so this map is pretty good. This is the Rhine River. So this was the area known as Rhineland that was demilitarized in 1936. Here's the capital, Berlin. This is the Elbe River here. See where we stopped. Does that make sense? Now, here's Czech Republic, and Prague's down in here. So we're going to let the Soviets do this. Now, I want to bring up Dresden. How many of you guys have ever heard of Dresden? Okay. What's notorious about Dresden?
Firebombing.
The firebombing of this city. Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book about it called Slaughterhouse 5? Yeah. Did you guys have to read that, or was it an option to read, or? Yeah. Okay, and it's about the bombing of Dresden. Now, the United States Army Air Force and the Royal Air Force are going to bomb this city. Now, this is in the last few weeks of the war. We knew we were going to win. Okay? And Churchill really gets, by historians, a lot of the blame for this. He was pushing for bombing the city. Dresden is a very old city. It's a beautiful place, and a lot of refugees were kind of flowing in and out of Dresden. There was some military significance to it. In my War and Peace class, my students have to pick a battle and do research on it and teach it to the class. And over the years, I've had several students do the bombing of Dresden. And it's interesting because some students will teach the situation as necessary. It was the right thing to do. And a lot of students will teach it where it was the wrong thing to do. Well, the fact of the matter is we did it. And basically for not quite 48 hours, but almost 2 days, day and night, we bombed the city of Dresden. And we did it with fire bombs, incendiaries. And it killed somewhere around 20,000 people. Okay? The fire in Dresden was so large that it was sucking up all the oxygen in the city. And when that happens, it creates high winds, like hurricane force winds, because of how large the fire was. When the fire finally extinguished, they went in and they found bodies and so forth. And doing autopsies on these bodies, they found out that a lot of the people that died didn't die from smoke inhalation or from burning to death. They died from suffocation because there was no air to breathe in the city because the fire was sucking up all the air, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. Okay? Historians theorize that Churchill wanted us to do this to show the advancing Russian troops what we were capable with our air forces. To show them that, hey, if you mess with the United States and Britain, this is what can happen to your cities. Basically. That's the reason why we did it. Now, they did have some military significance as far as some of the factories they had and so forth. It wasn't a major industrial center, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, there was valued targets there, but firebombing the city caused a lot of civilian deaths. Okay? And it really becomes, at the end of the war, guys, kind of the poster child of the anti-war movement. And then you throw that in with the atomic bombs, okay? Then you start to see after the war, because guys, in World War II, cities with civilians in them were targets. Okay, today, when we bomb with our smart weapons, we try and hit specific targets and avoid civilian casualties. This really wasn't much of a factor in World War II. Civilians. And so there were many people, including people like Kurt Vonnegut, that tried to promote the idea of avoiding civilian casualties. And you saw a lot of people move in this anti-war movement, okay? An anti-nuclear movement. So, as the Russians come in, this is what Europe will kind of start to take shape as. This red is actually the Warsaw Pact. Okay, so Estonia, Lithuania, or Latvia, Lithuania, okay, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, Yugoslavia will also be communist, but they're under a guy named Marshal Tito. And Tito has the wherewithal to break from Stalin, but he's still a communist. Austria and Germany are going to be divided between the four powers: U.S., Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Okay? And I'll get into that in the next chapter. So, April 12th, 1945, Roosevelt will die. A brain aneurysm, or what's referred to as a cerebral hemorrhage, will take his life. Okay. For somebody that was born like my dad in 1929, so at the age when my dad was 3 years old, coming in 4 years old, President Roosevelt was president of the United States. Okay? And so all the way up until my dad was from 3 to 16, this was the president. Okay? Or if somebody was born and, you know, they were 6 years old. I mean, this was the president. This was the president. This was the president for a very long time. So the nation did mourn his death. And then Truman has to take over. Okay? Roosevelt did not live to see VE Day, May 8th, 1945. But I think Roosevelt died knowing that we were going to win. In Europe, for sure. Which is good that Roosevelt got to at least have that satisfaction to know that we were going to be victorious. American and Soviet troops meet on April 25th at the Elbe. Hitler will commit suicide. That's the official story. I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there. I did look that up, okay? I looked that up the other day. There are some files released by the Trump administration that showed that the CIA was doing an investigation into a submarine that was never found, that may have carried some Nazi leaders out of Germany before they surrendered. And on that submarine, it is theorized by some that Adolf Hitler was on it and escaped to South America. Huh? They went to South America. Now, there is truth to the fact that there were Nazi leaders that did escape. Okay? You had commandants of concentration camps, of death camps, that knew they would be hunted as war criminals. And so some of those people did flee and escaped. Some of them escaped to places like Canada. Some of them changed their identity and came to the United States. We're still finding these people. Okay, there was a guy in Canada that was found, this is about 3 or 4 years ago, who was very sick. I mean, he was like hospitalized. And they were able to identify him as this person that ran this camp in Germany that killed a lot of people. And they said, we don't care if you're in a hospital bed, you're going back to Germany to face trial. Okay? Now, there's a strange movie about this. You would love this. It's called Apt Pupil. Write that down. Apt Pupil. Okay? It's about this high school kid that is kind of enthralled with the whole Nazi thing. He's not a white supremacist. He's just like really interested in the Nazis. And he's looking through books and he sees a picture of a guy and he goes, that looks like my next door neighbor. Okay, so he starts digging into this guy's background and figures out he was a Nazi. Okay, and he's posing as a different person. So it gets strange because this kid like messes with him, and I won't ruin it. Okay, it's called After. It's a weird movie.
When was it made?
Probably in the 80s. Yeah, I got to cover some ground here. Okay. Now, the official story is that in the bunker. Have any of you guys? Another really good movie is Downfall. How many of you guys have seen Downfall? It's about the last days of Hitler, and in the bunker, it is believed that he married his longtime mistress, Ava Braun. He killed his dog. He gave her a suicide pill. He took one and then shot himself in the head. Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda, and his family, this is known, his wife and himself killed their children, gave them suicide pills, and then killed themselves in the bunker with Hitler. Okay? Hitler had ordered his body be burned. Okay, because he didn't want it to be put on display or anything like that. I saw an interview with a Russian soldier a few years ago that was there, and they said they buried the body of Hitler in an undisclosed location, and then it was later moved. But he said they got the body and they buried it. So I don't know what to believe there. I know it's very easy. Okay, now look at this date. May 8th. Stalin promises to declare war on Japan 3 months after victory in Europe. He will hold true to that promise. That's August 8th. What's very significant here is we're going to drop the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6th. Okay? Japan's going to surrender, okay, by the end of the month. If we would have dropped the bombs before or a few days earlier, and Japan would have surrendered before Russia declared war, it would have been a lot more difficult for Stalin to get troops into, say, Northern Korea. Operation August Storm is Russia's attack on the Japanese. So the Soviet Union is going to be able to expand its communism because they're going to declare war on Japan before Japan surrenders. And that's going to change the course of human history for a lot of people. Okay? So the timing here is just really kind of interesting to look at. This is actually after VJ Day. Okay. So, we've got to deal with the Pacific, all right? We've had some victories there. Yes? Yes. Thank you. So, we've had some victories, right? Down here in the Solomon Islands, in Guadalcanal. What else have we talked about out there? Coral Sea, Midway, right? Now we're going to have to island hop across the Pacific. Okay, so anywhere the Japanese have airstrips, air bases on these islands, we're going to have to take. And there's a bunch of them. Okay? MacArthur, who's the head of the army in the Pacific, General MacArthur. Did any of you guys do the homework? The homework? Those 3 different pages I signed?
In the books a couple weeks ago?
Yeah. Yeah, Ken did. Stina, yeah. Ty? Dylan? Marlon? Kelly? Good. All right, there were some questions about, well, there was a map in the book, and you had some questions, okay? And that was about the Philippines. Okay, so when we were on December 7th attacked, they attacked the Philippines, and the American military fell down here to Corregidor. Okay, and they were pushed out. MacArthur was forced to flee. He was ordered to leave because we were about to be defeated. And MacArthur said these famous words: "I shall return." Okay, but the Americans that were captured on the Philippines and the Filipino troops, okay, were fighting alongside us. Okay, the Japanese are going to capture, and then you get the Bataan Death March. Okay, where they're forced to march for days without proper food or water, and a bunch of our guys are going to die. Okay, under very harsh conditions by the Japanese. So we're going to have to go take these. Okay, MacArthur's in charge of this. Nimitz is in charge of the Navy. Okay, so airstrips we got to take. Okay, taking these islands is going to be very costly in American lives. Now the last 2 islands, as we get closer to Japan, are going to be Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And these are the ones that are most talked about, okay, because they were massive engagements. And so we'll focus on those as well. How much time do we have?
We have 9 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to pause this and I'm going to show you a video.